Welcome to Surviving the Black Church, a podcast that sheds light and brings awareness to religious trauma and dismantles oppressive systems within the Black church.
Welcome back to Surviving the Black Church podcast. This will be part 2 of our deep dive in how Christian nationalism has created a historical trauma bond with Black folks. Part 1, we set the stage.
We did.
Nikki and I, we talked about Christian nationalism. We talked about how it has been fused with Christianity. We fused it, how it's been fused with Christianity and national identity. That's pretty much what Christian nationalism is, and how there are roots in colonialism, manifest destiny, and really how it evolved into modern movements like the religious right and the Seven Mountain Mandate. And Nikki, you brought this into perspective, and I wanted to give you some space before we dive deeper into, this trauma bond.
Yeah, I mean, part 1 was really the framework, and even that's kind of heavy to listen to. So I hope you came back. If you're here now, you're listening, that means you're here. But stay the whole time, because if we don't acknowledge what the root system is, it's hard for us to really heal. You know what I mean? Individually, collectively, we understand that there are systemic forces that are working, that are at play against our collective demise, but there is beauty in sight, right? I once was lost, but now I see. And there is beauty in acknowledgement. And so this is why we extended the first episode of talking about Christian nationalism, because we really wanted to take some time to explain how this connection formed. We ended the episode before this, part 1, we ended part 1 talking about how the Christian nationalists and their insidious plan to reach out to the Black church, to reach out to Black leaders, how historical this is, and they do this in a very covert way. And a lot of Black pastors and leaders, not all, but many, have used a lot of the messages that they have received sitting under apostolic hubs, apostolic centers, Christian nationalist churches, and they have brought those messages into the Black church, into the Black community but it seems without vetting these messages, because as you listen to part 1, a lot of these messages, a lot of these plans, these policies that they want to put into law are very anti-Black. So I don't understand how you can, hear and see what they want to do. Project 2025 is an example, and still say, I am going to feed this to my congregation. And then many parishioners often don't know how to vote, and they look to their Christian leaders to give them wisdom and understanding and direction on how they should vote. So it's a trickle down system, and many parishioners hear, okay, the pastor said we need to focus on these 2 areas or these 3 areas. I'm going to go and vote the way pastor told me to. That's not everybody, but a lot of people do that, and they don't vet what is being taught. And again, then we vote and we put people in office that are against our advancement as a people. So we looked at all this and say, okay, there's more to it than that. There's more to it than this alliance. There's more to it than this process that's been happening for decades, although it seems to be accelerating, especially under the era of Trump. So what is it? What is this alliance about? So this episode, we really want to pull back the curtains. We want to get a big, big light, one of those circle lights that people use when they want to do IG lives. We want to get in on high beam. And we want to really look at the root system of this alliance, how it became to be, and what really is it, and how is it impacting us as a people. So we're asking you to employ your methods of grounding, taking time. If you have to pause it, come back to it, jot some notes down, but stick with us. This may not be the most exciting episode, because just like any type of surgery, when you get to the root, it can hurt a little bit. But in order for a surgeon to try to attempt to bring healing to a patient that has been wounded or scarred or riddled with disease, you have to go to the root. So,
Mhm.
this is what we are attempting to do today. Again, our disclaimers. We're not politicians, we're not political activists, we are not speaking for the left or the right. It may appear to be that way, but we're not. We're speaking from a trauma informed lens. We're speaking from a lens as being Black religious trauma survivors ourselves. We're speaking from a lens of practitioners. And ultimately, we are speaking from a lens of humanity and having a heart for human rights. So, with that, I just wanted to lay all that groundwork first before we really dive into it. We're going to give some history, but we're also going to be looking at the root. So, don't run away. Let's wait for the surgery to be fully finished.
Yeah, exactly. And like Nikki said, this topic is very heavy, and it's been heavy for many of us. And we're not talking about church culture. We're not talking about taking sides politically. We're not even talking about politics. We're talking about something that lives in our collective cellular memory. Okay, because Christian nationalism has really shaped history in
Hmm.
America.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, Christian nationalism has used faith and weaponized it in ways that have decentered, dehumanized, and destroyed our community,
Yeah.
marginalized communities, historically oppressed communities. And what's really powerful and also painful is that our history is tied to our lived experiences as a
Hmm.
people, as
Hmm.
Black people. And
Hmm.
I'm thinking about our ancestors who were forced to hear biblical verses in
Hmm.
scripture that
Hmm.
justified their bondage and exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Slaves, obey your earthly masters. And how that duality of faith as both a tool for oppression
Hmm.
and liberation still exists today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where this idea of the historical trauma bond is coming in here.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when you think about trauma bond, it's a concept that really explains how we can be attached to a system that has harmed us,
Mhm.
that has
Mhm.
abused us, because at some point in our history, in our lineage, that attachment was necessary for our survival to stay alive. So that is what we're exploring in this conversation is the development of this trauma bond,
Mhm.
how it's persisting, how it has
Mhm.
persisted, and
Mhm.
most importantly, how can we heal? How can we reclaim our faith? How can we reclaim our spirituality? How can we reclaim our identity for the pursuit of liberation?
Yeah.
So I think that people need to hear not just the history, but
Mhm.
how also this is really showing up today in the lives of many people in our communities, and it's still impacting
Mhm.
people in our community. So bear with us, be patient with
Mhm.
us, settle in, and we're going to unpack some really heavy but necessary truths in this episode. So let's get into it. Historical trauma bond. What is that? So, a trauma bond is a psychological and an emotional attachment to an oppressive system or abuser. It develops when people are subjected to like prolonged stress or prolonged
Mhm.
trauma over time, and you are overly reliant on your oppressor for survival.
Mhm.
So that's deep because it's not
Yeah.
just about physical survival, it's
Mhm.
also about emotional and spiritual survival. And for us, oh, go ahead, Nikki.
And that right there, sometimes when people hear survival, we think of basic needs. Do you have shelter? Do you have food? Are you taken care of physically? But again, that part of highlighting the bond being emotional and spiritual in order for us to survive. So, many of our ancestors that were enslaved, they had no choice. If they had other practices that they brought over from Africa, they had to deny them. They had to let them go. And now, in order for them to survive and their children and their children's children to survive, they had to adopt a new religion. And, we're talking about the formation of this bond. Remember, it's not just physical, it's emotional and spiritual as well.
And for us, Black folks, as Nikki was saying, is that the origins of this bonding based on survival started in the slavery era. And if you think
Mhm.
about it, the religion that was weaponized was Christianity,
Mhm.
and that was the tool to justify their enslavement. So verses like Ephesians 6:5, which is the one I cited earlier in the episode, slaves obey your earthly masters. And the another one was the Colossians 3:22. These were scriptures that were applied to the slave to strip them from their dignity and their humanity, and also used to program the brain and the psyche to
Mhm.
convince that the enslaved African obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience was godly. Obedience to the oppressor was the way and the only way as to be expressed on this earthly plane. The concept of freedom that will come in the afterlife, that will come in heaven. So you've been denied access to liberation and freedom from the onset on the planet. And that was the experience of the slave. And so at the same time, you have development of the trauma bond during slavery, but they were not allowed to read the Bible. They were not allowed to read. They were not allowed to interpret any type of text for themselves.
Right.
That means if that was true, they were dependent on an external source, which would be the interpretations of the enslaver or handpicked preachers by the slave master who were preaching submission and obedience.
And you can insert for the select few that were able to sneak away and read, or many in the North were able to read, and some wanted to come down to the South and help others to learn how to read. The first book that they used to do that was the Bible. And it was, there was a version that circulated called the Slave Bible, where many texts of liberation and freedom were omitted from this particular Bible, but the ones that remain, that were highlighted, that were encouraged even by Black preachers is to submit to those who have authority over you, be obedient, be submissive. This is the way of God. This is the way to godliness. You submit to this type of abuse, you submit to it. You don't question it. And so, what that does to someone's psyche initially and then over time is horrific. And I want to throw this out there because I was listening to you, Jonathan, and started thinking this. This may not be for everybody, but there may be some people who are of the faith and listen to this and say, well, Nikki, Jonathan, nice that you want to take us down history and memory lane, but guess what? The blood covers all of this. I forgive them. Jesus forgives me. He forgave them. Everything is washed away. The blood covers it and we're good. We don't have to go down memory lane in order to figure this out. And I'm like, sometimes people don't realize how they go down memory lane for everything else. We go to the doctors and they ask for a family history, a personal history. They want to go down memory lane to see how you got to the point where there's a disease or a disorder. So then they can then, perhaps if needed, do a surgery. And so we allow that process to take place. But when it comes to faith, this is a touchy thing. Don't touch this. Don't touch that wound. But we have to go back to the beginning and see this, and even though people may say forgiveness and the blood washes all this away, well, newsflash, systemically, this has still been occurring to this day. So in your mind, you may look at it like, I've forgiven this. This is nothing that I need to really probe at. But you are being affected by this bond that we're just starting to uncover now. So I would encourage you to stay and listen and not to trying to change your mind, but perhaps expand your perspective and listen to a different perspective when it comes to this. Forgiveness can't wash this away per se. This is history. So I just wanted to throw that out because I know that that can be used to spiritually bypass a lot of stuff that we've been through, even if it was not of our own volition. And so I just wanted to preface that as well.
Yeah, and I think that that is I think that that is something that we, in terms of just looking at what has happened from the past, we have a tendency to avoid that's to avoid the the emotional overwhelm or the pain that comes from actually looking and confronting the past. And, and I think it's just, as we will kind of go into this later on in the episode, is I think it's important to look at the past to see how it's showing up in the present, because it's still showing up. Like you
That's
said,
right.
these are history is repeating itself,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
if the blood has washed over all these things, why is it still happening today? So part of this is understanding why, right?
Right.
Understanding the history and understanding the origins of the trauma bond,
Mhm.
because faith became a survival tool, but at the same time, it came with the message of be obedient, be compliant,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't speak, don't talk, don't question, don't challenge, don't even think about it. Just take it in. And then here is where it becomes complex in the
Mhm.
narrative. They, as in our ancestors, as in the enslaved Africans, didn't just accept and internalize the narrative, they reinterpreted and repackaged Christianity through
Mhm.
their own lens.
Mhm.
When we think about the story of Exodus, that story became a symbol of hope. That story was a God who delivers the oppressed, delivers the marginalized, delivers those who are hurting. And here's where the duality of this comes in. While the Black church became a space of resistance, resist the devil and the devil shall flee from you, but at the same time, the church carried the weight of unprocessed trauma.
Yeah. Mm.
So,
Mm.
Nikki, what's your take on how this duality carried forward? This sense of the church being a space of resistance and a space where we carry the weight of unprocessed trauma, the duality of that.
I mean, and it's a heavy weight. It's a generational weight. The fact remains that trauma bond did not disappear. In fact, it fortified and it advanced and it grew. And we don't even see it. That's how deep it is. When you and I were even talking about the topic of Christian nationalism and speaking about how we see there's been an alliance with many in the Black church with Christian nationalism, we said we're going to cover this. But we knew that in covering this, we have to talk about the trauma bond. This is not a topic that people talk about because it's so hidden, it's so covert, is so enmeshed. And I'm in church at 3 p.m. for the second service. And the first service, the word was good. The second service, I'm going to get my shout on, my dance on. And I'm not being facetious when I say this, but I'm just saying we go through the motions of attending church, going to services, listening to speakers, going to conferences, things like that. Yet this trauma bond didn't disappear. This trauma bond has grown like a tree through our generational line, and it's still impacting us to this day. We may not see it. We may shout over it, dance over it, proclaim the word of God over it, but it is still impacting us collectively as a people. Individually, you may feel your own personal liberation in your faith. Individually, you may feel that God is blessing you with abundance and your children taken care of and they're in good health and you and your family are in good health and you are thriving individually. That's awesome. That's that part where you talked about that duality. So you're going to church, you're hearing, you are doing the things. You are being blessed on your job, but collectively, let's look at our people and the state of our people, and even politically, because though we're not fully going deep into politics, we're not naming too many politicians except who will be sworn in as a new president in 2025. But we have to see a lot of things are at the precipice of being walked back for us as a people collectively. And, back in the day, we did sit ins. Back in the day, we marched. We came together as a people. This is an effect of the trauma bond where we are now, where we're so individualistic. We're so me, myself, and I care about what happens to us collectively, but not enough to touch it. I'm just going to stay in my corner. And that is an effect of the bond. And we'll go more into that as well. But I say all that to say, because it's so hidden, it's so deeply embedded in us as a people, in our generational root, it's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of light to come to that root system so we can see it And then it's going to take a lot to start cutting the cords, even desiring to cut. Because when you are attached to a bond, even in a relationship, a lot of times you are gaining seemingly something from it. But when you weigh out the abuse and the harmful parts of that bond, it outweighs what you feel like you're gaining. And I don't want to get ahead too much of what you are going to cover, but this is a bond that needs to be dismembered. So we as a people, and hear us rightly, we're not saying I'm out of the faith, I'm out of the church. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about the alliance between the Christian nationalist perspective and persuasion that is attached to the faith of Christianity and the poison that is there and how it is trickled down and affecting us as a people. And once we realize we're drinking from a cup with poison in it, wouldn't you want to put it down? Wouldn't you want to retract yourself from it? Wouldn't you want to get some healing? And this is where we are coming from with our share today. It's not necessarily telling somebody to leave their faith, leave their personal relationship. It is about looking on the macro level, looking collectively at what's been happening for centuries.
Yeah. And also to your point, I think it's uh revealing how Christian nationalism has been so pervasive and influential and powerful within the Black community, within the Black church, because, like you said at the beginning, it is a generational weight. It is a legacy burden.
Mhm.
Even after being in chains and being, you know, in the system of the plantation system, like you said, it didn't just go away. It was a continuation. And so the evolution of Christian nationalism, it made its way in systems like Jim Crow. It made
Mhm.
its way in these systems of respectability politics.
Mhm.
And so this is an indictment towards the church. This is not an indictment towards the Black church systemically,
Mhm.
to look at it, to see how Christian nationalism by way of the Black church often encouraged this assimilation within
Mhm.
white Christianity or white Christian norms
Mhm.
of morality, of obedience, of the sense of control, of the way in which you express yourself, the sense of non-confrontation,
Mhm.
this sense of submission. And so that's where we begin to see the split
Mhm.
between the Black church being the sanctuary for resilience and survival, but then it's also a space where it's almost reinforcing the trauma bond. So
Mhm.
I think in just understanding the dynamics of this on a systemic level will help you to see how this is still playing out and what we can be more aware of and understand. And so I'm going to kind of break this down step by step so that you can
Okay.
hear how historically this historical trauma bond has persisted throughout history. So as you know, we said in the summary, slavery was from the 17th century, the 1600s to the 1800s. And so when you think about how Christian nationalism played out with on the plantation, there were Black people who were put into roles of being preachers. They were chosen, they were monitored, they were supervised in order to make sure that the slaves were under the control of the master. And so there were sermons that really pacified the sense of rebellion or justifying suffering as God's will.
Mhm.
And so these are the early origins of how Christianity, within the lens of whiteness, became a tool of control and survival. So when you think about the slave codes, this was part of the slave codes around just, having a code of almost a code of ethics for the
Mhm.
slaves, in terms of how they're supposed to conduct themselves while they were on the plantation. And so we mentioned certain scriptures that were mentioned, used, like Ephesians 6:5. But when it comes to the things in the Bible that relate to themes of liberation or freedom or justice or atonement, those things were omitted. Those things were left out. And then you have then the slave Bible. So so when you think about those early origins of this development, you have people that look like us that were considered safe or
Mhm.
non-threatening or loyal to the slaveholder, that's going to create this pitting you against each other within community. What does that remind you of? Pitting people against each other to create division and separation
Mhm.
between those who had this fictive leadership role of preaching the word of God and then those who were enslaved. And then you have this conflict internally with your relationship with your spirituality and your faith. So that was what was going on in the slave era. And then 1865 with the emancipation until the dawn of the 20th century in the 1900s, the black church, this is the reconstruction era. We call it post emancipation, but this is
Yeah.
reconstruction where, the black church became an anchor for the black community. It became a place of education, resilience, hope, and there was this understanding of how can we create an environment where we are advancing the race or becoming more civilized in society
Mhm.
because you know during that time it's like the slaves were having to come off the plantations and having to integrate back into society. So here's a trauma bond again: respectability politics,
Mhm. Mhm.
because these churches that were an anchor in the black community, they emphasize morality, they emphasize modesty and assimilation as a survival strategy because they had to survive. They had to survive in this violent, racist society because while legally slavery ended, some of the dynamics were still playing out.
That's
It's
right.
still racist,
That's right.
still a
That's right.
segregated society, right? So even with Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech, he was encouraging Black people to pursue vocational progress, economic progress, and also encouraging moral conduct rather than the energy of challenging and confronting the segregation that was going on in the society head on. And so many of the earlier construction of the Black church was adopting a survival strategy so that Black people can continue to live and survive in this environment that emphasize hard work, respectability,
Mhm.
conformity as a way to avoid violence in the South.
Mhm.
So when you think about the trauma bond, this is part of the trauma bond, and the trauma bonding around need to assimilate into a white normative behavior in order to survive and live. So I'm not technically off the plantation. I'm not technically, free. I'm still attached to a system that was designed to oppress me. So what's standing out to you here, Nikki, so far?
A system that was designed to oppress me. I am bonded to it,
Hmm.
yet I have to engage in respectability politics. Yet I need it to survive, but the system simultaneously is suppressing me. I can't imagine what it was like internally for our enslaved ancestors to go through that time period. We have our own issues here in 2024, but the strength and courage that it took to go through, and some of them might have even been aware of what was really going on, but they had no choice. Systemically, they had no choice. They didn't have, the ability to get drafted into the NBA and make millions of dollars like that, or become a rapper or a football player. Like that wasn't at their disposal where they could possibly try to do things in a Black empowerment sort of way. Like they had no choice in order to survive physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They had to be bounded to their oppressor. And we as a people, we survive. Not just that, we will survive something. Okay, it didn't take me out, so I'm not gonna let it take me out. I'm gonna keep moving forward as if nothing happened. That's a trauma response that's been generationally passed down. I'm not gonna talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I survived it. God allowed me to survive it. Therefore, why probe? Why go backwards? I'm here. My family's here. You're fed, aren't you? Black moms say that. What you crying for? You got, you had your dinner, you have your clothes, you're going to school. What else can be the problem? And we're so conditioned. to behave and to move that way. But this is a trauma response from years and generations of just learning, put your head down and keep moving forward. You got out of it, you know. And so that bond elicits so many trauma responses that we're still dealing with today. And it's disheartening. It's really disheartening. And, you know, individually, we can at least acknowledge this and attempt to do some work to start untangling the cords, but collectively, there's still an umbrella over us as a people. We're not saying we have the answers to collectively start to break through this bond and break this bond. But, you know, the words liberation are so potent, you know, and even pseudo liberation, where we have this appearance that we are free because we may be connected to a particular faith or belief system. We have personal freedoms within ourselves. That is awesome. But sometimes we forget, what about our collective freedoms? You know, for what it's worth, with all that our ancestors dealt with back then, they still had a mindset of us. How does this impact us? How does this hinder us? How will this advance us? What can we do together? And we have grown with this trauma bond, with all these trauma responses. And I think you either talked about it or will talk about it, it's caused that split, that division. And now back to the original topic, we are yoked back again, unawares for a lot of it, to, you know, a system that is seeking to establish in this country as normative and very overt and covert. And we are, again, history repeating itself and actually becoming voices for this system to perpetuate. You know, it's disheartening. My heart aches when I think about this, but we have to see it so we can heal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One thing that came up that is kind of off script is that I know that there is often this accusation of the Black community having a victim mentality. There is a
Mm-hmm.
difference between real victimization
Come on.
and a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our ancestors experienced real victimization. Okay. This is severe levels of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And we gloss over the issue when we are discussing when we are discussing how Black people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and
Woo.
we need to take some individual responsibility for ourselves. And it is so invalidating and dismissive to just then say you're a victim, you have a victim mentality. That is not accurate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, as we explore this history and understand what real people, real Black people had to go through, this is not an
Mm-hmm.
imagination. This is not something that we are making up. This actually happened,
Right.
and how their means of survival required compliance.
Mm-hmm.
It was a
Mm-hmm.
requirement because they would die. It was life or death. And it reinforced dependence on the oppressive system of Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
So as we move 30 years ahead outside of, into the 20s, into the 50s, we see the rise of evangelicalism.
Mm-hmm.
We see this persisting even further, where it prioritized this sense of piety, this purity.
Mm-hmm.
We start seeing this salvation, mind you, completely dismissing and overlooking systemic justice over the
Mm-hmm.
injustices of the past. We're
Mm-hmm.
just going to be pure. We're
Yep.
going to do salvation. And even in some Black churches, this influence has shaped that in moving the needle away from, or the attention away from, segregation that was going on, moving the attention from the housing inequality with the redlining, racial violence that was going on with the lynching. We're going to just be pure and pious and act like it never happened.
It never happened.
And it's not
It never
happening.
happened. Right. And this notion that God is endorsing for us to shift the gaze now is looking at piety and holiness and purity and, you know, what is moral in the eyes of the white supremacist system? What is moral in the eyes of Christian nationalists? And all this need for, you know, systemic justice let's put that behind because after all, you guys are a victim anyway. So it's your fault. So Christian nationalists, we're not even focused on that because we look at that as your victims. We're going to focus on what we think is moral and what we think is pure. And then we're going to put God's name on it and that God endorses it. And then we're going to push that out all over. And then we're going to recruit Black pastors to no longer talk about social justice and progression and advancement in the Black community. We're going to start substituting scriptures like, you're all one in Jesus. There's no difference between Jew or Greek or rich or poor. We're all one. Let's not focus on race. It becomes divisive when you focus on race. Meanwhile, they don't want to focus on race within the religion, but they want to focus on race in the streets when it's police brutality, when it's, the housing area, the, Medicare, Medicaid for the Black elderly community. Like there's so many different areas that race is focused on. But when we get to church, let's all put on a mask and pretend that it never happened. And it's one thing when the Christian nationalists are echoing these sentiments. It's a whole nother thing when we do it. But we're not speaking of this as a place of trying to judge or point the finger to our people. We're doing these episodes so our people can see these are all trauma responses. This is a result of the trauma bond that's so deep inside we don't even see it. It's a tumor that's so deeply hidden under some major organ that it's hard for it to pull up on the ultrasound. It's hard to pull up on the MRI. The doctors have to go in and move organs around to see what is the problem. That's what we're talking about. And that tumor got there metaphorically because of the trauma bond that came from the abuse of enslavement of our people in this country. And so hear us. This is not judging pastors. This is not pointing fingers, but we're asking pastors to actually consider this and to hear this. Ain't nobody telling you change your faith. That's not what we're saying. We're saying understand the root system, understand how we got here, and understand what's really at play. And it's not what you think it is. It's the trauma bond that goes all the way back. So yeah, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, this is history that has already happened. This
Right.
is this people have already lived through these experiences, and it is understanding. It's not to operate in this revisionist way of trying to change what has already happened. This has already happened. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing that we can do to try to go back in history to edit and revise and modify the
Mm-hmm.
history that has already taken place. This has
Mm-hmm.
happened, and this is important for us to understand these historical accounts. And even with just during the industrial revolution, there was an upward mobility of Black folks during that time where
Mm-hmm.
you know black people were entering into the workforce and taking on jobs, and they were moving in this respectability politics type of identities of middle class, the forming of the middle class. And I say that because um, I know that there are churches that were being created around the time in the origins of televangelism. When you think about the
Mm-hmm.
50s and the 60s and seed faith messages, and prominent figures, whether it be the 70s, Creflo Dollar, TD Jakes, uh, and other types of prosperity prosperity gospel leaders in that space were really taking advantage of the opportunity for the Black community that were in these upwardly mobile occupations and like in this type of movement to really exploit their vulnerability, because the prosperity gospel movement was really about sowing a seed, which was giving money and
Mm-hmm.
sowing money into the church with the promise of having a financial blessing sent to them by
Mm-hmm.
God. And while there is a thought around prosperity gospel being about hope or offering hope, it brings us into this individualistic survival mindset once again,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of Christian nationalism, not a
Mm-hmm.
collectivism mindset, but an individual mindset. You know, which can further distract you from the systemic issues like poverty, like
Mhm.
homelessness, like economic inequality, like just wage gaps, not being paid, all these different things going on in our community. But, because I know how today we often talk about, because this is something that shows up today to say, well, I'm going to rely on myself. I'm going to do what I can do for me, and everybody else can do what they can do for them. But this
Mhm.
idea, because we are a communal people,
Right.
we're a group, and that's
Mhm.
that's in our DNA. But
Mhm.
these type of experiences takes us away from that, and it reflects the bond of using faith to endure suffering, financial suffering, without addressing the root causes of what is actually going on in our community.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's important for us to understand that. And as we move through the timeline, we go into the 80s, and that's when we begin to see the moral majority and the Christian
Mhm.
right and all these new movements come, the Reagan administration, the Reagan era,
Mhm.
where Christian nationalism comes back again, in aligning and recruiting Black leaders to validate conservative policies. That was going on back then, and that was 40
Yeah.
something years ago.
Yeah.
And we begin to see the formation of rhetoric around abortion, around LGBTQ issues, around family values, even around, I remember the Nancy Reagan, just say no, and
Just
the
say
dare
no.
bear, and all of that was going on back then. And so, but these were policies that were put in place to really harm our communities, Black communities, like, you know budget cuts to social programs, police brutality was ignored. All the things that were going on back then is similar to what's going on right now.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so that's taking us to today. So does this sound familiar? Because we are now seeing Black pastors. Some of them are aligning with Christian nationalist leaders today under the guise of having shared values,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, I'm pretty sure I've said this on some episode already, but I feel like I need to, share this again. But that experience, because 'cause I've been in so many different type of churches, all Black churches, and I've been in, non-denominational churches. I've been in more right-wing Christian nationalist churches, and I didn't even know that's what it was at the time. But, one of the cults I was in, very famous, IHOP out in Kansas City, and, I just remember I've always been a person that like to see the problem, and if I could help to be a solution to that problem, then I'm jumping in that gap. I wanted to be a change agent. I wanted to be a world changer. And so, when I was in these spaces where it was steeped in Christian nationalism, which I didn't know that's what it was, a lot of initiatives or things that were plaguing the Black community during that time, they were not on the intercessory list. They were not at the top of the list in these circles. It was basically there are two areas, and I think I might have said this in the part one episode, which was going after, abortion and overturning Roe v. Wade and trying to end rights for the LGBTQIA plus community. And anything beyond that, not to say they didn't pray, they prayed for Israel, they prayed for certain things to take place in the country, they prayed for politicians that were of this mindset and this ideology to be put in positions of power so that they can overturn things. So they supported a lot of politicians, and I was in all of that, all up involved in all of that. I'm saying that as an example, as someone who, when I went home, I didn't put my Blackness to the side when I was in these spaces, but it's like all of a sudden I forgot. All of a sudden it was easy for me to assimilate in whiteness and whatever they said the cause was on God's heart. Okay, we need to pray for this. We're praying for this. There wasn't anything really that rose up in me and said, wait a minute, let me talk to one of the leaders and say, Trayvon Martin just got, shot or whatever. Do you think that we need to pray for the Black community? We're hurting, right? Like that did not register. I was so in under a spell, if you will, for lack of a better term, that I was not even cognizant of the pain of my people when I was in these spaces. And over time, I think that that period of time from like when Trayvon got murdered and like, I don't know, for a good 10 years or so, it was just one after another. Philando Castle, like one after another going down. And I'm just like, it started to get louder in my heart. But at this point, I had already assimilated so much, I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know how to bring that up. I was talking amongst some of my friends that were there that were Black as well, but you know, I was so in it. They were more like aware and ready to say, no, we're going to pray about this. I was still the one that was lagging behind, right? And there's a lot of reasons to that. But you know, just being able to see that you can be totally unaware of the bringing this into the forefront of your faith. You may turn on the news at home and you may ache for your people and go to a church that may not be predominantly Black, and you may be the minority in that space and just have to deal with whatever they feel is on the heart of God. And you see they're not including what's going on in our communities. And this is not a matter of victimization
Mhm.
or, hey, we're over here. Can somebody pay attention to us? Can somebody accept us? No, we're saying we want to survive and we
Mhm.
want to thrive too. We want to have wonderful weekends without worrying about if the police are going to come and violate us. We want to be able to do this, that, and the third without there being, you know, repercussions of a racist person in the name. We want to be able to do that, right? But that did not register to me. But I was so deep in their theology. I went to their prayer meetings. I put my money in. I sowed my seeds, like you were saying earlier, but I was divorced from the pain of my people. And it took series of this happening in different churches and cults that I was in. And I was the minority a lot of times. Once I fully came out of all of that, this is when sight became a big part of my recovery. And I had to see not just what the cult leaders did to me and the abuses that happened to me. I had to start reconciling with myself in compassion. Nikki, you dropped the ball a little bit with your people, you know, but I couldn't even do that fully without a lot of shame. You know why? Because what the internalized message was God doesn't care about Black people collectively.
Mhm.
What makes you think that he does? I
Mhm.
mean, look at the Bible. He liberated the Jewish people, Moses led and everything like that. And I know what hue Moses was, but he did it for the Israelites. Okay. You know, there was, you know, Holocaust and there was, you know, a great evil that took place, but you see how they are bouncing back or whatever. Where do you see evidence that God cares about your people? Why would you even lean on him for that? And that question, I'm not going to touch that tonight, but these are the things that I was thinking about. And Christian nationalist teachings and ideologies had done its work on me, and not just me, generationally, and people I knew that were also Black and under the same persuasion. I had some that was like, yeah, we're here, but we're not taking all that. And I respect them now to this day. To this day, if they hear this and they want to see, like, oh my gosh, yeah, you were on target, you were on code. I was not. I was
Mhm.
not. And it pains me that that was the case. But I say all that to say how blind some of us can be in these spaces of faith
Mhm.
where they set themselves up almost like God. God
Mhm.
only speaks to them. God gives them direction for the country. God tells them what the definition of morality is. God gives them the rules and gives them the playbook, and then they are supposed to release that to the rest of the country and the world. Who said that? Because the last time I checked, there are some beautiful modalities that are coming out of Indigenous people. There are some beautiful modalities coming out of African American people. There are some beautiful healing modalities that are coming out of Mexicans, all the tribes of the earth. It is not just those in whiteness, and I'm not talking about everybody, I'm talking about those who set themselves up as power, using power and control to dominate people. You are not the authority. Sorry, you're not. And so I had to really do a lot of work to come into understanding of this, but I don't blame myself anymore. We're talking about how deep this root is and how easy it is to assimilate the same way, similar to what I did in these spaces of faith, even within the Black church.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I think, we do need to extend grace and compassion with ourselves because we didn't know,
Mm-mm.
and this is
Mm-mm.
not our fault.
It's not.
It's not our fault. And I have to be honest with you, like, Nikki, like, I didn't know anything about Christian nationalism at the time that I was in my church. I mean, I had no concept of it. I did not differentiate Christian nationalism and Christianity. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is why we have to understand the history. We have to
Mm-hmm.
know this history
Mm-hmm.
and the harmful ideologies that have come out of this. This is not about shaming or blaming, it's about understanding. And so that is why we are bringing this stuff to the forefront because a lot of people are not aware. They may be
Mm-hmm.
in this space and they cannot differentiate themselves from what it is that they believe in and what
Mm-hmm.
the oppressive system is imposing upon them, you know? And they have internalized it because they've used is operating under the guise of God and Jesus. But is that even what that is? And I know the Bible even talks about another Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible even says about the another Jesus. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there, and then as we go through this history, I think that acknowledging that pain and that heartache and that generational weight is what we need to do. And it's
Yeah.
necessary. And it may not be as cookie cutter and neatly put together,
Mm-hmm.
but these are patterns that we've seen before. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nope. Nope.
This is nothing new. And we're
Nope.
now seeing with these Trump era alliances that they're bringing it to the surface again.
Mm-hmm.
And even with black pastors who were invited to the White House to publicly endorse policies that include voter suppression, that include the
Mm-hmm.
economic inequities, that include cuts to healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
prominent black leaders.
I knew some of them. I saw the pictures. I knew some of them. I've been in some of their houses. Not all of them, but some of them. And the rest of them I knew of because I've been to their conferences. And I just was like, huh? What? What are we doing here?
But can we
You know,
make
that,
a connection to what
yeah.
was going on in slavery to
See? Yeah.
the trauma bond, right?
Right. It's the
Darrell,
why. Yeah. Why do you wanna be in a picture at the White House? Why do you wanna
right.
be close to, that type of power,
Hmm.
and ignore the cries of your people? What's in it for you? What type of package did you get from, this I'm talking about the first term that Trump was president. Who knows what it's gonna look like for the next term, but what did you gain?
Right.
And it's really sad, just
But
anyway.
but the person decided to go into going back to the history of operating in this individualistic mindset. You went outside of yourself and didn't think about how policies that you're standing inside to get a photo op that
Mhm,
disproportionately harms and
mhm,
hurts black communities because we're bringing in this trauma bond again and there is no historical context to your decision to meet with this ally.
mhm,
And
mhm,
there again, it reflects the trauma bond where
mhm.
proximity to power, proximity to this Christian nationalism is seen as a path to safety or
Yeah,
influence.
safe and
Even
loyal.
yeah, there's a disloyalty bond
Mhm, mhm,
or disloyalty bind between the oppressor and the oppressed. Even when the power upholds the system of oppression, do you even care about that? These black leaders do you even care that this is upholding the system of oppression? Do you care about the history? Obviously not. And even when you see some of these black church leaders criticizing BLM as divisive or ungodly, these are the same
yeah,
tactics that happened during slavery
and
to pacify the
BLM
resistance.
as a movement, not the organization. Let's be
Right,
clear.
as a movement.
Yes, yes, that Black
Black Lives
lives
Matter as
truly
a movement.
matter. Yes, yes, yes.
But even just the lack of acknowledgement that Black
Mhm,
lives do matter,
mhm.
that was never even considered.
Right.
It was like, "Oh, it's divisive, it's ungodly, it's unbiblical, it's
Mhm,
anti-family."
mhm. Yeah.
The same type of energy that was said by the slaveholder and the slave masters when the slaves decided to escape from the plantation, when they decided to rebel, when they decided to go outside And when they were labeled as having dementia praecox and diagnosing them as mentally ill for escaping the plantation
Ooh,
and having
talk about that.
schizophrenia and
Ugh.
having mental, because freedom is not designed for the slave. The idea of it being a free slave, this is what they were thinking in the slavery era. They were diagnosing, there were scientists and
Mhm,
physicians like Samuel Cartwright that
mhm,
was studying Black people and their experience. And it's the same type of thing that is replicating itself.
mhm.
They did not believe that we should be free. So
No,
how is this any different?
no.
There's no difference.
And those that are in power that like to use power to continue to oppress.
Mhm.
Again, we're not talking about individually because we know there's some allies of ours in the white community, but we're talking about the ones that are doing the things systemically. There's a part of them that's just like, as long as they are unaware of what we're doing, we can continue to use them. We can label them as mentally ill because they want to be free. We can label them as always wanting to be the victim. We can label them as trying to pull, they need to pull by their bootstraps. We can always put some label on them so that the minute they try to collectively come together to try to obtain their freedom, we will always have something to keep them in shame so that they don't have the desire anymore to advance, but they have the desire to assimilate and obey.
You bring them back into the power and control. It's just the same theme, different mess. It's the same thing. There's
Mhm,
nothing different.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
it's just, and even with just the cultural conservatism, these stances on abortion and LGBTQIA rights and gender roles, this is all an effort to align Black people to Christian nationalism.
mhm,
It's just
mhm,
wedges. It's ways
mhm,
in which to navigate it. And even with just respectability politics,
mhm,
with, this complicit nature of promoting Eurocentric European standards of beauty with having lighter skin or
mhm,
straightened hair or other types of categorical markers of acceptability or
mhm,
respectability. I have to present myself as more white in order to survive in this society.
mhm,
Anything that I can do to get close to passing as white, to fit the social favorability,
mhm,
to fit into the white normative construct, I will do it. All
mhm.
of that is internalized oppression.
It's
All of that
internalized.
is anti-Black,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
all of it is rooted in survival.
mhm. And part of that fitting in to be able to assimilate into whiteness, the control and the manipulation is to pretend that you don't care about the advancement of your people, the liberation of your people. You don't care about, police brutality and you don't care about us having certain human rights. I don't care. I don't talk about that because, Jesus covered it all. The blood is all, we're all one. It's not black nor white nor Jew nor Gentile. And so, yeah, you don't have to worry about me being in this church. I'm just going to obey and listen to my leaders, and I'm not going to rock the boat by bringing up certain initiatives that should possibly be prayed about or things within the community, connecting with the community. And so we're quiet. We don't bring those topics up because after all, that would be seen to be very divisive. And you're separating the congregation. I've seen white pastors say that on the pulpit. We're not focusing on that. Or they may act like they do, but look at their leadership. Are there any black or brown people in leadership at the church? There are certain ways where they show you where their heart is and what their agenda is in some of these churches. And so, it is very unfortunate indeed, but we have to wake up because they're going to do what they're going to do, but we have to wake up and have a desire to untether ourselves from this bond.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and this is the purpose of sharing the information so that we can defy the lie and embrace the truth. We need to wake
Yes.
up. We need to understand how all of these dynamics are in place, how they create unequal
Mhm.
power imbalances and create these power dynamics that that helps us to distance ourselves from being who we are, being Black, being, a Black person, to be more white. And even just in the way in which we are often distanced psychologically from accessing mental health support, of
Mhm.
just, you need to pray it away. You need to rely on prayer. You need to just, endure like a good soldier, and
Mhm.
in your faith, overcoming. God will take care of the depression. God will take care of the anxiety. God will take care of
Mhm.
the trauma. And so that over reliance on the belief system, which is actually over reliance on Christian nationalism,
Mhm.
is the only tool that you can use to resist, or to be resilient over the situation that you're in, is to rely on this. And so
Mhm.
that is why our community, that's why there's a stigma in our community. That's why we don't like talking about mental health. It's because of that. It was positioned in our community to deny us the knowledge, to deny us the access to our mind,
Mhm. Mhm.
brainwash us, to program
Brainwashing.
us to look at white Jesus,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's it.
Mhm.
There is no other way. This is the
Mhm.
only one singular way. And everything else is demonic. Everything else is
Mhm.
immoral. Everything else is an abomination. You need to
Right.
seek out this one way. All of that is
Right.
survival based.
It is survival based, and it sets this notion up that everything you need is right up in the house. Black folks, we call it the house. It's all up in the church. It's all here. And so, if we've talked about this in previous episodes, if you have a teenage daughter or son that says, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm dealing with some issues mentally. I don't know what's going on. I think I want to go see a therapist." We've been conditioned to say, "Why?
Hmm.
What is a therapist or the S word, which I can't stand? What is a shrink going to do to help you? Thank you for telling me. We're going to call the pastor. They're going to lay hands on you. Maybe on Sunday in front of everybody, we just get everybody to pray for you. You're going to be fine." Now, not knocking you wanting to express your faith and through the form of prayer. However, your child is asking for help outside of the four walls. But again, we can be so hypocritical because we'll say that one hand, but then we'll go to the doctor. If our car is broken down, we go to the mechanic. We don't bring it inside the four walls of the church and put oil on it and say, "Okay, Holy Spirit, make the car work." There are some natural things that we do in order to remedy things that need fixing. And so, that whole stigma that we have, I hope that over time, and the awesome people that we know in the Black community that are practitioners that are helping to teach and to educate and support people, and even in churches, to understand the necessity of the mental health community and how mental health and faith can work together. And we would be remiss if we did not mention there are Black churches that are more progressive, that understand some of these things that we're talking about, and they have found a way for their faith and the advancement of our people to coincide. And we honor you for that. Those who are not Black but are allies, and they're progressive with the LGBTQ IA community, and the things that we need to see happen in this country for our people. There are some that are doing that. We're not talking about y'all. Keep doing what you're doing. We're just talking about collectively the need to really, really tap into this. So you are hitting it, Jonathan, by exposing some of this stuff, and especially the pray it away, and you don't need anything else outside of Jesus and what's in the four walls.
Yeah, but we got to know where that comes from. This is why we have to understand, because we talk about stigma, we talk about mental health stigma, but we don't know the why and the
Origin.
what
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the origins. And this is why the stigma was created, was because of the disconnection from the self. We
Mm,
talk about fragmentation of
mhm,
identity. It is hitting us in all areas of our human activity. And so that's how powerful and influential this Christian nationalism is, and how it's just disrupting all of what we know to be true
mhm.
within ourselves. And
Right.
so when we hear people say this, it's an understandable reaction, because it's a survival mechanism. And so even with just anti-woman, the idea of just discouraging women to take on leadership roles, and to, whether it be the holiness and sanctification culture or the purity culture, and, being women being an object, and the patriarchal obedience to men and women at the bottom. This is all Christian nationalism, to keep women in
Mhm,
the house, and The man is out there, the breadwinner, and the woman is in the house cooking and doing the things and taking the domestic activities. That's what they want, the Christian nationalism framework. They
Mhm.
want this separation of gender and the
Mhm.
divisiveness between this gender and that gender and the traditional roles and returning back to those roles. And here we are again with this trauma bond, you
Mhm.
know, pitting men at the top, women at the bottom,
Women at the bottom,
you know,
particularly Black women. Mhm.
black women at the very
Mhm.
bottom, you
At the
know,
very bottom.
you think about how black women were treated during slavery with just being hypersexualized and oversexualized and raped and killed and all these things happening to the black female body, bringing us back to those days. So, black communities, this is the case that we're making. Black communities are being harmed by this.
Yeah.
And these alliances with this Christian nationalism is only legitimizing it. Is legitimizing that this is what we want. This is what we
Mhm.
like. We don't want anything else. We like this. So that's where we are. This is the modern manifestation of the trauma bond. So now let's talk about like how is this really affecting us individually? Now we've talked about all of these experiences, all of these areas, all of these things, and it often leaves Black people feeling shame,
Mhm.
feeling fear, feeling unworthy, in having a relation. We talk about the church talks about having this relationship with God, right? But
Mhm.
this Christian nationalism disconnects us in
Yeah.
ways that it doesn't want us to have a relationship with God. It wants us to have a
Mm,
relationship with something other than God.
mm,
It wants us to have a relationship with Christian nationalism. It wants us to
mhm.
have a relationship with our oppressor.
Mm. Mhm.
And this conflation of oppression that has been transmitted from ancestors and things of that nature in our faith is conflated because it's distorting our ability to trust in ourselves and having even a healthy spiritual practice. So if the church is advocating this whole you need to have a relationship, because you hear that, right?
Yeah.
You need
Yeah.
to have a relationship with God and get in a relationship. But what does that even mean in the context of Christian nationalism? What does that even mean?
They just
It's
want
so
people in
overly
church.
simplified.
That's all. They just want everybody in the church, and that's it. It's like,
Yeah,
so
and
if
you
you're
just
not in there, then you have no relationship with God, which is so untrue. But yeah.
it's so untrue, and it's like get a relationship with God, but ignore Christian nationalism and the effects of how historically impacted us as Black people. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Right.
Oh, but this is what happens when you have this duality of faith and oppression.
Mhm.
Um, And I think that, these harmful ideologies, as the Black church is preaching this, and they're so harsh and so condemning and critical of Black people, and this demand to be loyal and obedient, there's a cognitive dissonance that's happening. There is an
Mhm.
anxiety that's happening. There's a depression that's happening because
Mhm.
it makes people feel exhausted emotionally and mentally because you're constantly being beat down every Sunday, every Wednesday, coming to church every time and getting beat down every single time.
Mhm.
And then we call that rebuke and,
Mhm.
correction and all these things. But where does that even come from?
And these are some of the effects of that trauma bond that you're talking about, that
Yes.
mental and emotional exhaustion, the shame and the fear. And we're talking about all of this, but then there's another part. There's an addiction to this attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know if you've done an episode yet on religious addiction and how some people, people say too much of something is not good, but when it's God, oh, too much of God, you're fine. I've seen people that have gone off the deep end, having too much of not necessarily God, but a system that was set up against them. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, it's obsession, it's
Mhm.
addiction, it's
Mhm.
compulsion, it's
Mhm.
all of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
How a lot of this is disordered behavior that is part of the trauma bond. It's
Mhm.
part of it where you're so overly reliant on it that there's nothing else that you need in order to survive.
Right.
Even the songs say, "I need you to survive."
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it's constantly like longing and yearning for
Mhm.
this attachment and being just addicted. And I've even heard, people in the church say, I'm addicted to Jesus.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
sold out for the Lord.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
addicted. And they're using addiction as a way to frame their relationship with God.
Mhm.
That's dysfunctional.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is not known to the average person, and so a lot of this verbiage is used, but, it can be harmful just the same. We're talking about not someone having a personal relationship with their creator and with God. We're talking about being addicted to the system, being addicted
Mhm.
to the push and pull of the system. That's, when you have a trauma bond, you're bonded. A trauma bond, these are some of the effects that happen. There's a codependency on the system. You can't imagine yourself not attached to this system. You need this system to survive the way you think about it. There's a psychological, there's a physiological addiction to the system. So it's not even just the awareness of this trauma bond is so deeply embedded in us as a people that we're not really aware and acknowledge it at collective level. But then if we do acknowledge it, we have to work through the physiological addiction to I have to be in this system. I have to be close to proximity of power. I have to be connected with these teachings because if I don't, not only will I feel like I can't survive, but I also feel like, what does that mean about my relationship with God? If I am not connected to the teachings of Christian nationalism that don't really focus on my people and us advancing and existing and surviving. So I have to forego that in order to be a part of what they call moral and important. And so that addiction is passed down in the DNA, down the generational lines, and we're still seeing the effects now. So you may get a 20-year-old that says, Dad, I still want to have a relationship with God. I do not want to go back to the institution. I do not want to go back to the system. I am in therapy. I am finding connection with myself and finding connection with my creator, but I do not want to be a part of the system anymore. And there's an upswing of young adults that are considering themselves the nuns, where they're not affiliating themselves with any type of religion at this point, because a lot of them are healing from the generational trauma from their parents and their grandparents and things of that nature. But when we talk about the traumatic effects of the bond, unfortunately, it's an exhaustive list. The generational trauma is passed down through the faith. The trauma bond is cyclical. It seems unending until somebody acknowledges and start to say, I want to divest from that, and then start to break that bond. It creates division within the Black community. You talked about the mental exhaustion, and individuals remain trapped in this toxic religious environment, and it's the fear and the shame and or the fear of divine punishment in the afterlife that keeps people also attached to this bond. And so for those that have somehow untangled some of the cords to actually back up and see this, kudos to you, because this is not easy. And it is very, very hard to see with the naked eye sometimes. And this is why we're doing some of the heavy lifting, and we've not even touched the surface. There are other authors and educators that can go deeper than what we're just touching, vaguely touching it. But, delayed social and political progress for our people, there's a lot of consequences for being connected to this trauma bond.
Yeah, and I think just in we have a lot of different harmful effects, and I think overall, like, this is a cyclical bond, and we're going to get into kind of like talking about how do we heal, how do we break, how do we cut the cord, because a lot of people who are listening are like, oh my God, we are trapped. Many people are trapped in toxic environments. People are trapped with all of this information, and there is no release. There's no way to express all of it because these systems are limiting access and opportunity to explore what is actually healthy, what is actually a spiritual practice, what is actually a path to heal from this stuff, because a lot of this is beyond our locus of control. And so we're going to kind of shift into kind of talking more about, like, well, what's within our control, because and I don't want to get that impression either about just sharing this information. This is history, and a lot of
Yeah.
this is something that is beyond our control. But what we can control is uh, the ways in which we react and respond to the trauma bond. How are we? This trauma bond is not just historical, it's deeply entrenched. It's
Mhm.
manifesting through politics, it's manifesting through faith, it's manifesting through our culture. And it requires us to challenge, to confront the harmful, oppressive theologies. It requires us to reclaim a very liberated, focused spirituality. It requires us to create spaces to heal without being judged or shamed. And so the fact that we are able to even bring this topic to the surface, to even just name it and identify it as a trauma bond, to even just acknowledge that this is even a thing is the first step. We have to understand where we've been to know where we're going. We got to go
Yeah.
back. We
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
understand where the trauma originated from, what it is, how it works, how it
Mhm.
functions, how it's still impacting us. This is all psychoeducation. This is all
Mhm.
an
Mhm.
educational framework to help you to know what this is. Yeah, it's painful. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's powerful. Yeah, it's a lot. But we got to see this for what it is because we got to feel something because we've been so disconnected from reality, our reality, because of this system. And then once we begin to acknowledge and validate and understand, then we can start, you know, reclaiming what is rightfully ours. We can begin to begin to make space and room to honor the suppressed feelings and the emotions and the traditions and the values and the norms. We can begin the process of reclamation and restoration of
Mhm.
our cultural and ancestral ties to our past. We can go back through the past and come back through it again. We can begin to focus on justice and really allow ourselves to be angry,
Say that.
to grieve that, to
Mhm.
grieve the
Mhm.
losses generationally, to grieve that, to grieve the injustices that have happened to our ancestors that are still happening for us today,
Mhm.
that we can transmute that anger into action, into change, into things that we can do within ourselves and with each other in relationships over obedience,
Mhm.
over compliance, over people pleasing, over fawning, over needing to impress, needing to prove and overcompensate and doing all those things. Normalize discussion around mental health in spiritual spaces, addressing the generational trauma, addressing it through therapy, addressing it through trauma informed, trauma sensitive, culturally
Yes.
relevant care and
Yeah.
support.
Yeah.
We need more safe spaces. We need more
We do.
spaces to talk about this stuff, to begin to question the harmful ideologies and the theologies so that we can confront this Christian nationalism. We can restore, we can reclaim, and even the respectability policy. We have nothing to prove to no one. We are excellent. We are a powerful, resilient people. We don't need to comply to any system. We have resources within our own spaces, but we need to know that. We need to take the message that is being talked about in Exodus and in the New Testament with Jesus to empower us, not pacify us, not to be submissive to the destructive teachings of Christian nationalism and justify the systems that harm us. So there's so many things that we can do in terms of healing and recovering, and it's gonna require more strength to break this bond. It has to be strong and intentional efforts to almost rewire, reconfigure, recalibrate to go in a completely opposite direction, 360. Because all of the toxicity and these connections and these relationships and these alliances need to be reframed and reshaped so that we can have healthier beliefs, healthier thoughts, healthier relationships, healthier practices, which is why we need healing spaces to do this work. There are theologians that have been trying to bring this work forward, like Dr. James Code or Howard Thurman. They have been trying to illuminate this issue that we've been talking about to help survivors to reclaim their faith that is in the business of uplifting and liberating. So, how do we get back into the liberation theology that where Black people are seeing themselves as human? They're seeing themselves as a reflection of the divine. They're seeing themselves as spiritual beings, not as subjects of submission, not as objects,
Come
not
on.
as tools of obedience, not as destructive forces within our own communities.
Right.
You know, how do we center justice? How do we center equity? How do we center love and compassion and empathy for the oppressed and marginalized? That's the work of liberation theology.
Mhm.
How do we begin to move into different practice and move away from the institutional religion that has been formed by Christian nationalism, and in practice meditation and mindfulness and nature, being in nature and ancestor veneration, things that have been demonized by Christian nationalism via the
Mhm.
Black church?
Mhm. Mhm.
How do we engage in a real relationship with God or the divine,
Mhm.
however that is for you, whether you
Mhm.
believe or you don't believe,
Mhm.
and that's gonna require a confrontation and challenging with the imagery and the symbolism and the archetypes that has been created, that has created God as an oppressor and God as a white man, or God as someone that's coming to haunt you every single day because you're living in sin and you didn't do something right. That negative self-talk, that super
Right.
ego that is telling you
Mhm.
that you're evil, that you're immoral. How do we replace that with a loving and affirming divine presence
Mhm.
that aligns with joy and freedom and belonging and
Yes.
access to real love and responsibility?
Mhm. Huh.
Not just talking about it and not
Mhm.
just love based on conditions. I'll love you if I'm gonna love the hell out of you, or I'm gonna love you if you do this for me. That ain't
Mhm.
it. That's not love.
Mhm.
That's not love.
Mm-mm.
How do we create spaces where we or create networks where we have people around us that are justice oriented, trauma informed, spiritually
Mhm.
inclusive? Whether you join groups or have support circles or healing spaces where we're talking about this stuff and
Mhm.
we're doing the decolonial work, we're doing the deconstruction work, and we're just being ourselves,
Mhm.
you know? There's so many things that we can do. There's so many
Yeah, like,
things that we can do.
getting involved in liberation focused movements. So for me, like I said, when I was involved in all those churches, and cults and everything was more around Christian nationalism. Well, I didn't initially get involved as soon as I came out on movements that were focused on liberation because I still didn't see this bond. I did not understand all this. So it took some time, but even doing some of this work is very therapeutic for me, and connecting with other voices that are doing it in either a macro or a micro way. But it can be very healing if you've been like myself on one side where everything was more focused on white Christian nationalism and what they thought was right and real and important. And you move from that and you connect with your brothers and sisters in the community and you find where you can be involved in activism and connect with your people. There is no shame here. I can say what I've been in and share that with you because the shame has been lifted. I did not know, but now that I know and my heart has been made to come alive, so to speak, I'm able to start getting involved in these different communities and these spaces. And then support, if you are a person that's of the faith and you want to remain in the church, support churches, Black churches that are doing the work, that have been more progressive. Like I said earlier, this is not every Black church. There are some that have been on the front lines for some years. They've been talking about this and they've been seeing a person like Trump coming on the horizon, an ideology like Seven Mountain Mandate, a policy manifesto like Project 2025. And they've been doing the work as much as they could on their level. Find those churches, find those communities that are centered around justice, in whatever fashion or form that you see fit. Use your voice to challenge harmful systems. Use your voice. If that means from YouTube to IG to Twitter, speak up about what you see, what has been uncovered. Research, do more education. Like I said earlier, we're just scratching the surface. Jonathan mentioned James Cone. He has a lot of books, a lot of work around the topic of liberation theology. Start there if you don't know where else to start with this. But as far as individually, when you break the trauma bond, when you cut that cord, there's a part of you that's going to feel even physiologically like, oh my gosh, how can I survive? How can I exist? I'm so used to fill in the blank. But now you want to move forward and we want to place that trauma bond with an individual level of freedom and healing and purpose. And
Mhm.
so it's almost like we're replacing fear with curiosity.
Mhm.
Who am I outside of this ideology? Explore new perspectives, new ideals. And again, for those that are in the faith, I know there's been this notion that if you go beyond the line and become curious and learn different things, that you're going to walk away from the faith. Baby, if that is your faith and that's real, no curiosity, no book is going to change that, right? But if anything, it helps you to be more human. It helps you to understand those who are around you in a deeper way. It helps you to be more connected to your community. So this is why, we encourage you to do that. Replace shame that has been passed down as a result of Christian nationalism, of white supremacy being maintained, and what has been done to us as a people. Replace that shame with worthiness. Remind yourself daily, I deserve joy, pleasure, love, and liberation, and not pseudo liberation where it appears because I might have quoted a scripture or I've gone to a church service or I spoke to so and so or someone prayed over me. I'm not talking about that spiritual level of liberation that the scriptures and everything like that. I'm talking about outside amongst my people. I am free. And we have to maintain an individual aspect of that before we can see it collectively. Replace submission to this system, to this ideology, to this mandate with agency. Claim
Mhm.
your right to live authentically. Make your
Mhm.
own choices and define your spirituality or your world view. Choice is really healing when you are a Black religious trauma survivor because a lot of that was removed from us. And as Jonathan showed, all the way back in history. And then replace disconnection. If you've gotten to the point where you want to start breaking that trauma bond and you are now disconnected from that, but the effects of being in that bond made you feel disconnected from yourself. Replace that level of disconnection with belonging. I belong to me first. And if you believe in God and your creator, then I belong to my creator. And then I belong to my community. Find spaces that honor your story, that honor your experiences, that honor your identity and your healing. These type of things are so important, and ground yourself in knowledge, ground yourself in love, ground yourself in our community and the things that we could do on a collective front. Once upon a time, we thought about us in
Mhm.
addition to thinking about ourselves. We have to get back to that as a people because what is on the precipice to come, we're going to need each other. We're going to need communities, So this is the time to educate yourself, not only about Christian nationalism, but learn about decolonized faith systems, replace harmful narratives with the truth, and then on a bodily level, practice embodied healing. Strengthen your intuition. When you feel that, this may not be the place for me, this may not be the community for me, lean into that. Be curious about that, observe that. And, most importantly, prioritize self compassion and self care. This is not our fault, y'all. If you didn't hear anything else today, this is not our fault, but it has been passed down on our table right in front of us. And so as we untether these cords, we break these bonds, we heal from it, we advance individually and hopefully collectively, we're going to need some self-compassion. We're going to have to remind ourselves it's not our fault, but I want healing. I want liberation. I want freedom. So therefore, I will submit to the surgery to get the tumor out, metaphorically, so that I can experience healing. So these are just some of the things we didn't want to leave you with all the history and observing the bond without giving you some resources to tap into as you move forward with your personal healing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Nikki. And in closing, I know that what we just did was a lot, but we got through it. And just know that the trauma bond, in summary, is a psychological connection that was formed through repeated cycles of abuse, of power imbalances, and intermittent rewards. And what we did was offer a powerful framework for beginning to understand this complex relationship between us as Black people and Christian nationalism. And this bond is deeply rooted in centuries and generations of systemic oppression and spiritual manipulation. And it continues to manifest in harmful ways, systemically and individually. This is not a conversation that was based on shame or blame of any individual or any church. This is about truth. And it is about understanding where we have been so that we can begin to reclaim our spirituality as a tool of healing and liberation. And healing, as Nikki said, after breaking this trauma bond with Christian nationalism, it's not just about leaving behind the toxic belief systems. It's about stepping into a new life filled with connecting to yourself as we connect to others in relationships within communities. It's about empowerment. It's about liberation. And as we reclaim the spirituality, we prioritize our healing, we surround ourselves with supportive communities and supportive individuals within community, we can begin to counter the generational weight, the legacy burden of shame, of blame, of fear with purpose, with joy, with love and freedom. You are not bound to endure.
Yes, yeah,
You were made to thrive. Thank you for being with us on this
yes,
journey. Let's continue
yes,
collectively to do this work for
absolutely.
ourselves, for our ancestors, and the future generations to come.
Hmm.
And so until next time, take care of yourself and stay empowered.
Bye, everyone.